My fifth and final main argument. Compulsory public health measures, such as mandatory masking, forced vaccination, involuntary business closures, and other such measures taken in the name of public health are directly contrary to both the text and the spirit inherent in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, as consistently revealed by both the statements and the actions of the founders of our republic, even under epidemic circumstances of far greater duress. The framers of the United States Constitution fought the Revolutionary War during a 7-year smallpox epidemic that was proportionately far more deadly than COVID-19. And this contributed to the fact that American combatants alone racked up battlefield and disease deaths totaling nearly 1% of the overall population, to say nothing of the civilian deaths and sacrifices involved in attaining our independence. It's obvious that they valued their liberties far more highly than the cost of even a worst-case Spanish flu or coronavirus pandemic. Not only this, but what was proportionately the worst epidemic in our nation's history, occurred in 1793 during George Washington's first term as president, and not just anywhere, but in Philadelphia, which was the capital of the United States at that time. This was the Philadelphia yellow fever epidemic of 1793. In a city of 50,000 residents, 10% of the population, 5,000 people, died. Even more revealing for our current debate, doctors at the time thought that yellow fever could be passed directly from person to person or through contact with contaminated items. Does that sound at all familiar to anyone right now? If you want to know what an actual plague looks like on the ground, read some of those contemporary accounts and then compare them to your own COVID-19 experience. The authors of our Constitution did not just tell us, but they showed us, in no uncertain terms, where the line between individual liberties and public health lies, and we've crossed that line long ago. Did various towns enact quarantine measures on ships and individuals who were actively sick? Of course they did. In fact, the state militia cordoned off the entire city for multiple weeks, and many nearby cities and towns used their militia to actively prevent entry by any people or trade goods coming out of Philadelphia. But what we do not see is even more telling. We do not see bans on mass gatherings of less than a dozen people backed up by threat of fines or imprisonment. We do not see officials categorizing their citizens' livelihoods and employment as essential or non-essential and then forcibly suspending all pastimes they consider to be non-essential. People within Philadelphia had freedom of movement during the height of the epidemic. They conducted business. They visited neighbors, both sick and well. They attended church. Pennsylvania as a whole is not locked down, much less any other states, and there were no mask mandates. Citizens in Philadelphia actively, contagiously suffering from yellow fever were still free to choose what treatments to accept, and many of them declined certain treatments according to the dictates of their individual preferences and personal beliefs. Compared to the official response of all levels of government in 1793, we have gone off the deep end. If a disease that killed 10% of the population of the national capital and the largest city in the United States at the time didn't justify locking everything down, then why is it appropriate now for our city and state officials to do this? My argument is not that the authors of the Constitution did something, therefore it was good. I'm not saying that. My argument is that the Constitution's original authors understood the meaning and practical intent of the document that they wrote. The authors of the Constitution suffered through many national emergencies, military, disease, natural disaster, you name it, all of which were proportionately far more dire than COVID-19, and they did not see these events as providing justification for suspending constitutional recognition and protections of civil liberties. Therefore, we have no business doing so in this case. That is what I am saying. What I hear so many arguing, including people to my dismay, even family members and friends whose intelligence and goodwill I can vouch for from years of experience, is that it is both moral and legal to abrogate the essential liberties of 100% of the population in order to possibly extend the lives of less than 1% of that population. The framers of the Constitution, by their words and actions, clearly demonstrated that they believed that this was a bad trade-off and that it was not within the purview of the federal government, the state government, city governments, or public health officials to make such choices for their citizens. The founders were correct. The Constitution of the United States lacks an emergency clause not because of accident or omission, but by design, from conscious intent.